Welcome back to Deciding Iowa. Here we are at episode 3 of 6, covering our special episodes on water quality in Iowa. I'm Dr. Shawn Ellerbroek. I'm a cancer scientist, biochemistry professor, and a House District 57 candidate.
Congratulations. I'm Dr. Emily Boevers. I'm an OBGYN, mom of 3, and a health advocate. So in episode 1, Dr. Helmers talked about excess nitrogen and phosphate release and focused on state efforts to help farmers in their nutrient reduction efforts. I think we need to take a step back and discuss how those nutrients are applied to fields, how animal waste is regulated, and identify some important non-point sources of pollutants. Should we dive back in with our experts?
Yes, and let's start with Mr. Taylor and Representative Isenhart introducing the concept of CAFOs. With those letters CAFO standing for Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation. A CAFO, as defined by the United States Department of Agriculture, is an intensive animal feeding operation in which over 1,000 animal units are confined for over 45 days a year. And importantly, Iowa has the greatest concentration of CAFOs in the world.
Wow, that's a lot of...
Most of our pollution, however, in our waters comes from agriculture. You may have heard that the Polk County Board of Supervisors had a study done that was just released earlier this summer, which told us what we already knew, that 80-some% of the particularly nitrate pollution in our rivers and streams and lakes comes from agriculture. And I think most of that agriculture pollution comes from CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations. What happens is that the animals in the CAFO, of course, excrete manure and urine, and that gets collected in a big pit, and that pit is emptied out once, maybe twice a year, and they have to do something with that. So what they do is spread it on the crop fields, and really, I think most of them are over-applied. The CAFO operator has to submit what's called a manure management plan to the DNR that's supposed to calculate based on the nature of the waste and the amount and the particular aspects of the field where it's going to be applied. Taking all of that data, the manure management plan is supposed to calculate how much of that waste can actually be applied to the crop field so that the plants can take it up without over applying, because the plants only take up so much, and then whatever the plants can't take up is either passed into the groundwater or it runs off the surface into rivers and streams. And those manure management plans, I think more often than we know, are not accurate. We have looked at some and have found that they are not accurately calculated. In fact, we took one, the Sierra Club took one large beef operation in Clayton County to court because the manure management plan wasn't done accurately, and the judge agreed, and they had to go back and redo it. But that's only one out of thousands of manure management plans.
In our introduction, confined animal feeding operations, or CAFOs. Over the last, pick a number of years, the amount of CAFOs in the state has exploded, as in other states. I think we have somewhere north of 4,000 of them now. And, we'll call them factory farms for lack of maybe a better term, but they produce 109 billion pounds of waste in Iowa, which that's 25 more times more waste than all of Iowans produce ourselves combined. It's a lot of waste. And so we're not talking about, mom and pop size farms. We're talking about large confinements. And when they get to a certain size, they need to have a plan.
Yep.
In order to be able to meet criteria, and that plan includes how they dispose of their waste.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yep, that's right. How they utilize the manure management plan.
Manure
Yeah,
management plan.
yeah.
So how is that manure management plan tracked? And is in terms of contributions of nutrient release into our waterways, how much, because we hear a lot about
Yeah.
CAFOs. How
Yeah.
much might they be?
I mean, I think they're definitely a contributor. I think it's tough to say, how much of the nitrate that we see in the stream is from manure versus commercial fertilizer. I think, my colleague Dan Anderson estimates, we could supply about 20 or 30% of our nitrogen needs from the manure that's generated in the state. So, it's a pretty big component of the nitrogen needs for the state of Iowa. So that those producers, those individuals need to file a manure management plan with the DNR. That's gone from paper to more electronic submission, is my understanding. And housed with the Department of Natural Resources. We work a lot, or specifically colleagues work a lot with, how can we improve the management of that? I think that we've changed a little bit, at least from farmers that are utilizing that manure, from viewing it just as a waste product to it can be a good source of nutrients for the land. I think that, most people that grew up around a farm probably remember when there was livestock on individual farms, and that manure was applied pretty close to the barns, right? And so, some of those areas we still see because they're really high in soil test phosphorus, because they had manure for probably for decades. So, there's a lot of active education on how can we better manage that resource. Now one of the things I want to say is, we've done research where we've applied liquid swine manure at similar nitrogen application rates, plant available nitrogen application rates, as commercial fertilizer. And what we see is similar nitrate loss from that system. So if we apply at similar nitrogen rates, we would expect similar nitrate from whether we're using commercial fertilizer or manure. I think that there's probably greater opportunities for improvement in how we manage that manure, how we take account for the nutrients in that, and get as more of that nitrogen into the plant as possible.
So did you say that 109 billion pounds of manure and the nitrogen in that only would take care of 25% of our nitrogen needs for the state of Iowa?
About what it is, and I don't know the exact number on that, because one of the things that also happens is that when that manure gets excreted, so I'm not sure about that, that pounds there of nitrogen, or is that as that gets excreted and stored, we lose some of the nitrogen out of that system, either kind of to volatilization. And so not all of that comes out of the animal is available to the plant, but it is.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And when you look at a CAFO, then could a particular confinement then be producing more waste than they can possibly use in a way that would
their manure management plan would need to show that they have the land available for that manure that they want to use. But what I would kind of go back to, where there's opportunities for improvement in that, is, we're probably in many cases putting manure on, earlier in the fall than we would commercial fertilizer. So there's some risk of loss that happens there. And so, what may happen is a producer puts that on in the fall, and, they've seen from their own experiences that they're not getting very good crop growth with that. And so they need to put a bit more nitrogen down in some cases to optimize their crop production. So, we're actively folks that I work with, and lots of people at Iowa State and in the industry are looking at, how can we best utilize that resource? How can we try to move that manure application to a time of year that might be more similar to commercial fertilizer? How could we maybe, in some cases, put that down while the plant's growing? That's something like a little
Easier
outer
to spray
space.
fertilizer than to spray
Than
manure.
to
in
put
the
manure,
middle of
that's
summer.
exactly, and to inject it, because, injection is good in so many ways, because it reduces some of the odor and, reduces risk of any immediate runoff. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for improvement in how we manage that manure resource and how we account for the nutrients in there. There's fair bit of variability in that manure. There's probably more variability in the application of that manure than commercial fertilizer, because commercial fertilizer is a little bit more uniform product. So there is a lot of manure out there, and there's a lot of opportunities for improvement. And we were talking before that one of the things that some colleagues looked at was kind of the distribution manifolds for some of these manure applicators, and they found with some changes and kind of, this is where the industry really bought in, that they changed some of the distribution manifolds so that each of the tubes that go to inject the manure, there's a little more uniformity in how much is going to each one. That's a way that we
Sure.
can make sure that, we're seeing those nutrients go to, the plants that need them, and not having too much in one area and not enough in another area. But, the livestock industry is one that we do need to work with on managing these nutrients that are being spread on the landscape. Certain areas there may be local markets to utilize some of those, either small grains or forage.
You mentioned it, non-point source, and
Yeah.
we certainly went straight away to agriculture.
Yeah.
But there is other non-point source for nitrogen that
Yeah.
gets in our waterways or other nutrients. The totality of the urban landscape. I mean, you're looking at golf courses, construction sites, my neighbor's lawn.
Yep.
All of
Yep.
it contributes to a situation where, especially after a strong rain, where we're getting runoff.
Yeah.
How much of that is contributing to some of the things that we see in our rivers?
Yeah.
And how much does your program work to educate or to lower that contribution to what we're putting into, say, the Gulf?
Yeah, that's a really great question on a couple fronts. With our Iowa Learning Farms program and other extension efforts, we try to talk to folks no matter where they come from, rural or urban, and I think try to talk to them about everybody has a role to play in this. I live in Ames. I apply some fertilizer to my lawn. Can I reduce that? Can we make sure that if we're applying that, we're not spreading it onto the sidewalks, driveways, streets, that's going to get right into the stormwater system. So I think all of us have a role to play. But this one is a topic that's a little close to home too. I'm an avid golfer, for better or worse, but I'm a really avid golfer. Okay. I like minimalist design. Let me tell you that. I don't like courses that are really green. I like them a little bit more brown. And I like them on, more native areas. But
style golfer.
I am absolutely a link style golfer. Yes, exactly. But so, one summer, we did some events, and people were talking about what's causing some of these problems. And there was, one of the leading causes in some of these discussions that people were bringing up were lawns and golf courses. And so I tried to quantify, how big a contribution might that be? And, one of the items is that, we might have all told 2 million acres of developed land in the state of Iowa. And not all of that is fertilized, right? So some of it is, buildings and that kind of thing. And so, even if we were to be losing, nitrate from those acres, we still only have 2 million acres of that developed land versus 24 million acres of that row crop. And, I did a calculation, and it was, well less than 5% that could be coming from some of those lawns and golf course type systems. So not something that we should forget about, but we do need to recognize that they're not a very big contributor. One of the other things, if we think about our lawns and golf courses, if we go back to kind of what we were talking about before, those lawns and golf courses are growing a greater percentage of the year, right? So they have that living root system in there, so that even, so some of the quantification that's been done, even if they're putting fertilizer on those, because you have something living there, your nitrate leaching is probably less per unit area on those landscapes. So we shouldn't say, we need to all do a better job. And I think that's an area that, again, room for improvement. But I think, on the golf course side, I think with fertilizer prices increasing, maybe they're thinking about their fertilizer needs a little bit more as well.
Shawn, it's clear from that discussion that we have a lot of manure waste in the state, and we must be smarter in how we deal with it.
I understand there are waste management plans for CAFOs, but who watches over the implementation? How much is seasonal timing of field application considered in practice when spreading accumulated CAFO waste onto fields? Why is a group like the Sierra Club having to litigate waste management plans instead of proper state oversight in the first place?
Great question.
With over 4,000 CAFOs in the state and increasing federal deregulation efforts, reducing funding for water monitoring, and over-reliance on volunteer plan adherence, I fear for our water quality, and I don't think it's a high priority for the state as it should be. And it's going to cost local property taxpayers lots of money to clean up the water for their use.
Absolutely. Another obstacle is equipment access for manure management. For example, I wonder how accessible are the new technologies that Matt talked about. I can imagine that there is a huge cost barrier for a farmer, especially one who has land, equipment, seed, fertilizer, and payments looking at less than $4 for a bushel of corn. The math doesn't math.
It does not math at all. We can and should improve our monitoring of manure waste disposal and maximize edge of field approaches that minimize nutrient release. But this is just part of the story. So in our next episode, we will hear more from Dr. Helmers at Iowa State about his thoughts on the matter. See you then.
See you then.